You're watching Access LaPorte County Channel 97. Coming up next is the July 20th meeting of the Michigan City Economic Inclusion Initiative. You can find more information for this meeting at www.accesslaportecounty.org.
Those of you who are lots of money with that, so please go help yourself. My name is Clarence Holtz. I'm the director for the Business Development Corporation in Walker. This meeting, we call it the Private Legislative Initiative. And my background, the last 6 months, we reviewed 25 folks from the community and business and local nonprofits about how do we improve invest and the community that we focus on is the west side, Midtown, and the east side. Because those are the areas that we saw most of you. And for those of you who even have other things going on with the city, the city is going to see changes. There's a lot of investments in downtown, in the south side, and the southeast side. There's industrial, the city has wanted to, Mayor and Council wanted to fund water sewer lines for the highway plan, to help those who do industrial parks. So that's a future, bigger and better job in the city. Downtown, for the train station, that's the one that's started here in the next 30 days. Of course, the hotel, tunnel for the waterfront, and many other smaller projects. I know there's a lot of companies expanding right now in the city, and they need people. So the last 6 months, I'm not going to steal the thunder here, but we're talking about a lot of things about the improvement here. So tonight, we have some guests with us, and I'm going to let them say who they are. We were very excited about probably 10 months ago. We got a phone call. We were going to be part of the experiment, so to speak. Kind of guinea of course, taking advice, because folks who work doing this work with national basic, Chicago's, Philadelphia's, and New York. So the fact that they want to work with 3 small cities, we are very excited, and we've got a lot of capabilities, capacity to take. And so the last 6 months, we did a meeting and talk about what is happening in the community. So tonight, folks who are here will talk about what we've heard, and what things that want to put together. There's a lot of ideas, and we're talking about putting each of those things. There's a lot of groups who will have to collaborate, and it doesn't make this happen. Not one group, or one person, or one agency. There's a lot of collaboration to make this happen. And that's the exciting part, because collaboration comes to resources and funding. That's the key part. We all talk and figure out how to make it happen, and people want to fund it. We've also talked to a number of businesses in this decision, the pathways. Here's what's going on in the east side, the west side, and the midtown. So when people come asking for funding for a project, here's what they're talking about. We want to set the stage to get access to funds from our local businesses. It makes sense to the people, because people just live and work for us. People listen to this, get a person with childcare, better housing. So that's what we're talking about. We want partner with today with someone else here, Dr. Mr. Josh Anderson from Anderson, Florida, please.
Thanks, everybody. See a lot of advisory coalition members still up here, so thank you for being here. It's been a great 6 months. It's been a whirlwind. As Clarence mentioned, we're doing this in 3 cities, so Michigan City, Seymour, and Warsaw. We have a short slideshow for you here. This is more of an introduction and overview of the process itself. Probably at each of your tables, so you notice one of these documents. So this is what we're calling the agenda. It's an action agenda. It's a number of organized tasks where folks in this group have had a number of conversations that have led to certain things we want to take action on. They have a more inclusive economy in the areas on the west side and the east side. So very excited about it. Flip through this to see the actual agenda items and tasks. It's 68 pages, so it's not something we can talk through in 10-15 minutes. But look through it, there's a lot of information there, and we'll stay around and answer any questions. But we'll give you an overview of the process here. So A little bit about myself, I'm Josh Anderson. I run a planning, urban design, landscape architecture company out in Indianapolis. So we do a lot of planning work, a lot of strategic and community planning like I did here. Very excited about the process. And then I'm going to have Katie introduce herself.
Hey, Erin, and I was on the consulting team with Josh.
I'm David McCarroll. I work for Josh. It's been really exciting to be involved in this. I'm a reading guy myself from Chesterton, so we're close to my hometown and areas.
Excuse me, can you speak up a little bit? Speak up.
Well, yeah, I'll hold it close to my mouth. So, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, I'll repeat briefly what we just said. Introductions, I'm Josh Anderson. I run a consultancy, Anderson Bolander, out of Indianapolis. We do planning, urban design, landscape architecture. Katie Wren led the engagement portion of the effort, and David McCarroll from our team was just saying he's from Chesterton, so he understands the region. But we're very happy to work with you all. It's been an exciting process. The term for this process is CCEI. It's an acronym that stands for Community Centered Economic Inclusion. So this agenda, it's about taking action on a number of tasks. We're going to get an overview of the process, but for the real detail of what the tasks are, what the agenda are, we'll put these documents circulating around the room. There will be a digital final release later.
Is that online?
It's not online yet. It will be in about a month or so. There is a website with information regarding this process. So that's vibranceMC.com. And I stand corrected, this is going up on the website tomorrow. Thank you all for being here. A little bit about the process. So, community-centered economic inclusion. The target areas are the west side, midtown, and east side parts of the city, and looking at ways to build a more inclusive economy in those areas. It's a very place-specific agenda, and coming up with tasks that folks in Michigan City can work on specifically for those areas. What is CCEI? It's a process that was developed by List at Brookings. So Bill Taft here is with List. He'll talk a little bit into the presentation. We have a slide that he'll speak to. And then Hannah Love with Brookings, raise your hand. So this is their process, and we've been around to help locally implement and guide that process here. And Patty, I'm sorry, Patty, wave your hand too. Patty's here. Yep. Sorry. The goal is to uplift disadvantaged communities to improve community and economic opportunities. It's a local plan based on local ideas and input, so these aren't our ideas. These are ideas that are shared with us and consensus built around over a number of conversations. Leaders and residents develop a common set of goals. So in the tasks, if you flip through those documents, there's 6 different categories and then 2 to 3 tasks per category, and that's what we're talking about with the agenda items. This process originated in large cities, and so this is a pilot effort to take that process from larger cities like Los Angeles, Detroit, Atlanta, and see how do we amend that process for smaller cities and towns to do the same sort of process, but customized and tailored to different populations. And so, as Clarence said, you're the guinea pigs. You, Warsaw, and Seymour are the first step in that process. So this agenda is both an agenda for yourselves, but a way of learning how to do this better as we transition that process to a more national audience of smaller cities and towns. And additionally, we're partnering with IADC on this because there's the Ready 2.0 program is a funding source that is available for certain capital uses. And so a lot of these agenda items are ready for that program, and we hope that this agenda can be used to help you be better prepared in those funding requests. There's two parts to this. There is the agenda itself, which is our focus, and then there's the learning lab. So monthly, the core teams from each of these cities have been meeting, discussing lessons learned and learning from practitioners that have best practice ideas for certain topic areas, but sharing ideas, sharing resources, and that. CCEI, the agenda itself process. So the first step in the process was to select a specific part of the city, not the whole city. That's true for both the large cities and for the smaller cities. It includes disadvantaged areas of the community. Disadvantaged areas and communities, we reviewed data about those communities, and that's in the document. We had a number of conversations over a series of months with local residents and leaders, and then, as I said before, we agreed to a list of shared goals. That's the agenda, and it includes economic issues, built environment issues, and civic and social issues. So at a number of the advisory coalition meetings, we broke out into tables around those topics and discussed what ideas we thought would best suit Michigan City. And then the goal was to finish in July, and here we are, with an action agenda of actionable tasks that we hope to complete over the next 3 years. Learning lab, Bill, I think you wanted to speak to this a little bit, but just the process, the 3 cities together, Michigan City, Seymour, and Warsaw.
Good evening. I'm Bill Tapp, as Josh mentioned. I'm excited to be here, in part because of this process and just the excitement that came out of creating the agenda in the community, but also because I actually was born here, grew up here. So I live in Indianapolis now most of the time, but I spend a lot of time here now. And so it's exciting to see the community coming together here to lift up potential for this to become the economy more vibrant, but also including people who maybe haven't benefited as much from the economy in the past, and neighborhoods that have not as much in the past. So I think that the place focus is a real opportunity. It's a little different than the approach to taking in small cities. We found this in all 3 cities, that it was sort of breaking down a focus for reinvestment and economic development in specific neighborhoods is just a different approach than any of those cities have done in this way. So I'll be really excited to see this move forward. Part of the thing that's really also different about this is this lesson of going through the process with input from the community in all 3 cities is going to bubble up into a national publication. Will focus on guidance to other cities around the country. So Michigan City will actually be featured in that and used in cities that are doing this kind of work around the country. That will come out later this year. So that, and also the opportunity that I think that comes with this, that Josh mentioned, is that you're only able to do this work in the 3 cities because of the support of the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. IEDC just received another large investment from the legislature to invest through the Ready 2 program. And so one of the things that they see this is each of these communities didn't benefit as much from Ready 1 as they could have. And this is a way to position to benefit more in the next round. So that is, I think there's both a local practical thing for that, but also some opportunities to feature what's happening here nationally, which maybe will gather some attention from other investors for Michigan City in particular. So I just wanted to mention that sort of context.
Thanks, Bill. Data. So key points, why did we select this area? So Clarence mentioned we want to make sure that these neighborhoods aren't left out, even as downtown and some other areas are seeing a lot of heavy investment. But a few other things, investment in downtown with the Shaw store, we want to make sure West Side, Midtown, and East Side aren't left out. Also, these are some of the densest parts of the city, even with primarily single-family homes. There are important sites for redevelopment and for connectivity, particularly on the west side with the prison site, NIPSCO, and Highway 12, all sort of surrounding or embedded within that neighborhood, so some large redevelopment opportunities as well. These are areas of lower educational attainment. 26% of the city's jobs are here. How do we connect residents to those jobs? 33% of the city's population are in these 3 areas. There's a high percentage of people of color, so it's very diverse. but there's also a high poverty rate, especially on the west side. So it's a combination of assets and needs that kind of led to the selection of these areas. This map just sort of shows those boundaries and those outlines, so most of the folks in this room are probably familiar, but if you're not, just for a little bit of context, this box here, that's the state prison site within the overall west side. So you can see it's not half, but it's a significant amount of the neighborhood. IPSCO site up here, Mount Baldy, Midtown, south of 11th Street, south of the station, and then the east side is made up of Eastport, the neighborhood, and some of the surrounding areas that include the casino, and then sort of centered on the East Michigan Boulevard corridor. Engagement, so a big part of engagement, and Kate led the engagement portion, was just meeting and talking with folks. The advisory coalition, when I mentioned 14 and advisory coalition, 14 is a small group of individuals that help to meet and organize the advisory coalition. So a lot of meetings, a lot of conversations, a lot of organizing, and then the advisory coalition is the group that came together at the same time every month for several hours and discussed the actual items to go into the agenda. What are our needs? How do we want to address those needs? What are our opportunities? How do we want to address those opportunities? And then who's going to actually perform those tasks? So you look through the document, each page where there's a task item has a who on the bottom right hand side. So those are the groups that are the tasks that those individual accomplish the most. Based on those conversations with the advisory coalition and the core team, well, in addition, we also had focus groups and interviews. So some folks either didn't have the time to be a part of the advisory coalition, but had great input, or had knowledge about specific topic areas or a specific place, and we met with them during focus groups or during interviews, and then had a public engagement meeting as well to get input. So all of that informed the agenda. 5 points that are probably the overarching highlights of what we heard were a need to create housing options for all, specifically safe and affordable housing, developing job readiness skills and eliminating barriers to employment. Some of the top barriers we heard were just the availability of daycare, and then transportation options to get to those available options. Also, building support for small businesses and entrepreneurs, bolstering community centers like the one that we're in now, and adding additional youth activities. And then lastly, advocating for input on key redevelopment sites. So some of the larger redevelopment sites, most of the required redevelopment sites, aren't owned by the city or outside control. So how do we advocate that when those sites are redeveloped, that they incorporate ideas from the community for the community's benefit? And so that was the goal of the agenda as well. How it works. So how do we do CCI agenda? We started with what we have, include what you've already planned. So we did a summary of all previous plans since the year 2000, and saw what's still a priority, what's been accomplished, what hasn't, and started there, and included what we're already working on. So not necessarily trying to recreate the wheel, but trying to organize and prioritize around the most important tasks for these places. And then starting the agenda, ideas and goals, we mostly met around focus tables to dive into the meat of the tasks themselves. And then we started with those ideas and goals that we generated and figured out the details from there. So who is going to be working on it? How long do we think it should take? And what are individual things we can do to help achieve those tasks? And then completing the agenda, the details of that were identifying top priorities, establishing timelines, so near and long term, or even midterm. You see that in the document. When we say near term, we mean somewhere in a year or less. By midterm, we mean sometime within that 3-year horizon, which is the focus of what we're trying to do. And long term, we know there are some ideas that are really important that are going to take years and years and years, but we want to take actions now to move the needle forward for what the community wants to see. And then identifying the steps and tasks, identifying someone to lead each task, and looking for potential funding sources. Those are all listed under each task base within the agenda. And then implementing the agenda, that's a 3-year timeline. So as I mentioned, some of those are going to take longer, but that's the goal here, is to carve out an agenda and tackle it and do as much as you can in the next 3 years. Schedule, so I'm noticing in pre-work, that was about meeting with the core team and establishing the area. The agenda, this process has been 6 months, so we met for 3 hours once a month for 6 months. A playbook is going to be issued. I should use the word report, kind of documenting what was learned from this process to help others that try to go through this process in small cities and towns. There'll be a national release to help cities across the country engage in the same process. And then, as Bill discussed, the Learning Lab took place at the same time. And then 2023 to 2026, that's the implementation part of it. 4 topic areas, I discussed this briefly, but really what we focused on were economic ideas. So things like overcoming barriers to quality jobs, supporting local entrepreneurs, and then developing healthy commercial nodes and corridors. And when we say nodes, we mean spots just near around intersections. Looking at ways to help the built environment. So how do we make streets more pedestrian friendly? How do we connect and add to trails and bike lanes, parks and public spaces, and even mixed use development? Social ideas, things like looking at community safety, adding cultural events and celebrations, telling neighborhood stories, and engaging in area youth. And then civic ideas, this idea of developing neighborhood associations, helping neighborhoods to learn how to organize themselves. And then developing local leaders, and even connecting residents better to the local government. This is a matrix that shows all of the tasks that are part of this agenda. So you can see this in the document, I think on page 31. Topic areas on the left, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Each one of them, this is the name of the topic itself, so supporting pathways to employment for all ages. Within that, these are the tasks we think that we can take to address that topic. These are create a local opportunity hub, overcome common barriers to employment, and engage youth in activities and entrepreneurship. And it goes on after each of these topic areas. Next is, what topics does this cover? Is it the built environment? Is it an economic issue? Is it civic and social? Or is it all 3 or a combination of 2? Timing, so in dark you'll see short term, again that's things we hope to accomplish in the next year. Midterm, that's things we hope to accomplish in the next 3 years. And then long term, there's only a few of these, but those are ones that are longer term projects that we want to work towards now, but we know they're going to take longer than the 3-year timeline. And then implementers, these are the lead groups that are going to convene to tackle the issues. And then here's just an example, so page 32 through 58, I think, I'm blanking on numbers, are the individual tasks. Each one will have the name of the task. Why is this a task? So these are brief, so it fits on a page, but this is why we're addressing this, whether because of data we've read, conversations we had, or other reasons. This is what we're hoping to achieve with that task. How funding, so these are funding sources that can be pursued to try and raise money to tackle these issues, or these tasks. How tasks, so this is sort of a year-by-year, step-by-step process for addressing those tasks. And then as I mentioned before, the who, in dark red here, or maroon color, these are the leading organizations that are addressing these tasks. And then in orange, or the lighter color, are people who are supportive of that group. Oh, and then when, just, this is an example, so this would be a midterm test. The other ones, it'll be dark on whatever the time frame is to accomplish that. And then I think that's it. This is just a beautiful picture of your city. So with that, I think we'll open it up for any questions. As I mentioned, we have think 50 documents circulating around, so dive into those and you can get into the details and the weeds of each individual task. But we're gonna stick around for a while and answer any questions, and we can open it up for questions now too, so. Oh, yeah, and for the rest of the night, it's a celebration. The advisory coalition, the focus team, us ourselves, we've all put a lot of our heart and soul and time and energy into these plans, so we're just really excited to meet this milestone. So it's a celebration tonight. There's finger foods in the back. It's also a chance to network with each other, so we'd love to see you stick around and have conversations amongst yourself or with us about the individual tests. Yes, sir.
Yeah, real quick. A few years back, we started something like this in the Eastport neighborhood. That was when Mir was mayor. We started moving on this plan. And I want to make sure that when we do this, we have short-term goals, things that we can accomplish along the way, because I noticed that we have a long-term plan, but if things aren't being accomplished along the way, people lose interest in it. So I hope that we learn from that exercise and have things that we can accomplish along the way. So we have to keep people interested, because if people don't see things getting completed, they fall off. And that's what happened when we tried to do that up there. And I hope we fix that with this here.
Absolutely, thank you. Did everybody hear that? So, great to have long-term plans, but if we want to keep people interested and working on this, we need some early ones too. So, yes, we have talked about that, and that's very important. Thanks, someone again. Yes.
Maybe in the book, just what's in following up this question, what's short-term, mid-term, and long-term? What are the time periods for short-term, mid-term, and long-term?
Sure. So short-term time frame is something we want to accomplish over the next year. Midterm is something we want to accomplish over the next 3 years, and then long-term is any of those items that are going to take longer than 3 years. Yes.
In response to that first gentleman's question, or comment, I don't know who it was, but you have the full support of this administration.
Yes.
Yes. Coming up in Michigan City, I remember urban removals. And I remember how the urban removal was supposed to make everything better for that area. And for us, I guess you could say it made it so-so. And I didn't mean so-so. But what I'm asking is how many, with this plan, how many people will be displaced? How many families will have to? Is there a plan for that? Is that supposed to happen, or is it going to happen? Do we see that happening? If you're bringing in new companies, new ideas, will that displacement happen with the people that are living on the west side, Eastport, in different areas?
Sure, thank you. So I'm just going to say that loud if anybody didn't hear it. The question is, with urban renewal policies of the past decades, there's concern, we think we're worried about displacement. Our folks that live here now can be displaced by ideas in this plan. And that is actually the goal of this plan is to do the exact opposite. So plans of the past, we agree there's been a lot of harmful plans and activities in the past. This, one thing that we think is unique about this agenda is that it's not like the plans of the past. We're trying to celebrate the folks who are here with an inclusive agenda. And so the goal here is to celebrate and support the folks that are already living in these neighborhoods and not this. Thank you. Yes.
There's a lot. Like we said, this is a very dense document. There's a lot of ideas in here, and I see very helpful in the bottom right corner who is leading each of these initiatives. What I'm not seeing is contact info. If we want community involvement, who we contact to become involved in some of those initiatives.
Okay, so I think I understand. So the comment was on the task pages, we list who the people are that are leading these individual tasks. And the question was, how do we get a hold of those individuals or somebody with those organizations? That's a good question. So Clarence, you want to?
We are in the middle of working on the website, all this on the website. And so one of the things we're doing is we'll be making all the people who are listed, contact members. The goal is to make sure when people meet and there's meetings, we can post it, and so you know when to show where and when, who's going to what. So, good question. This is vibrantmc.com, and tomorrow morning, this document is going to be, not the document, the paper is going to be online, so.
Yes,
Who are the leaders going to be accountable to?
I didn't quite hear you, I'm sorry.
Who are the leaders going to be accountable to?
That's a good question. When we talked about implementation in the previous meeting, the structure we talked about going forward. So as consultants, we're going to go away. And then the lead convener is still be worked out. But that role is the person that's supposed to help keep the overarching group together and track progress amongst all the tasks. Within each task themselves, we are also saying there needs to be a lead task convener. So amongst that leadership group that's listed, whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5 organizations or individuals, that group listed on that page, and it hasn't been done yet, but needs to self-select who is the lead person that all those groups report to sort of track that progress. So sort of a two prominent there. There should be a leader with each individual task that's responsible for tracking progress, and then the overarching lead convener tracking all of the different tasks and progress. Yes. Yes.
So is that the job of the coalition, of the advisory coalition, to bring together who's going to become the coordinators for each of these tasks? The reason this is so important is we've had other consultants come in. We had an urban design consultant that gave incredible advice for the revitalization of our downtown, and then nothing happened. All of his advice was completely ignored and never implemented. So it's nice to have this great report, but if we don't have an implementation plan, it's just worth nothing but paper that's printed out.
Thank you. Yes.
I would like to piggyback off of Councilman Dabney in regards to who will oversee these things. If you have an association in your neighborhood or in your area, for example, we have the Eastport Neighborhood Association. These plans that we currently have now, this is what needs to be presented in those associations, because they will have a board and have things set up, and then you have those from that community that's able to come in and things to be delegated to that.
Great. Thank you. Yes.
What about funding? Where's funding coming from? Is it private? Are taxes going to go up to implement this stuff?
I don't think that there's. We're being asked, what was the question? How is this being funded and are taxes going to go up? None of us have suggested any tax increases. There are taxing mechanisms that are already in place. There's the Transit Development District, and TIF is a common one, and EID districts. But all of the funding that this team has suggested is listed task by task. Different sources would apply to different tasks. So on the lower left-hand side of each of those task pages, you see a number of different funding resources that we're suggesting to apply for those tasks. That doesn't mean that you will for sure get those. Those are the sources available that we're suggesting you look. Yes.
Can you kind of put up the different agendas, because there's like 6 areas, right? Which means that there will be 6 different groups that will have a convener or a leader out of those groups, and kind of show everybody those different areas of where that leader is going to come from, where it's going to be selected from, and kind of break that down a little bit more so they'll know kind of how that process is going to go.
Yes, you can look at those.
Also, is there a time frame that leader, that convener, like when that will be, like we say, okay, that should be done by November the 1st. Like, Where should that be selected by?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have, added time about, your thoughts on that, John.
So, other communities that have a similar structure, I mean, I think the questions about accountability, who actually moves this forward, is that there's not a single answer. But in each one of these action tasks, there's the groups all the way on the right, the implementers, their name is only on there, they've already said they want to work on it. So I think that's a difference between a lot of plans they've come up with and say, well, this other could do this. Well, all of these groups have expressed interest in working on these goals and agreed that this should be a priority. So those groups together will, under each one of these goals, will actually then decide how they're going to operate, how they're going to collaborate to move that particular thing forward. Exactly how each group does it, whether they pick one group that's always going to be the lead all the way through implementation, or whether they meet and do it more collaboratively, that's up to the groups who put their names next to a goal. There's also obviously overall coordination that needs to happen, and so between the different tasks and all the organizations working on this, there will need to be coordination, communication, all of that. But the power of this is really there's a lot of groups that already put their name on it and said we want to make this priority and we will work on it. We will use our budget. We will go after new funding together. But that's where the real power of this lives.
Thanks. So, just a minute, Sylvia. Anyway,
Quickly, since we've been the coordinator for the past 9 months, we will probably still be having meetings in the next 6 months just to make sure we identify the leaders, because we notice there's different people doing different things. So we want to make sure, as you mentioned, there's accountability and somebody who's leading it. So the questions somebody has for who to contact, we want to make sure those names are on the website. And so we're going to identify those people out of those groups so you can contact them. And at some point we'll put on the website who the lead coordinator for each staff. So we're still in that process right now.
thanks. And then Erica, back to your point. So let's just leave this slide up so everybody can look at it. But you were asking, can we just show who those people are for the different tasks? So this is page 31 in the document too, but I know you may not be able to read it because of the distance, but these are the tasks, and if you follow it straight across, you'll see the groups that are the leadership groups for those tasks on that page. And it's shown page by page as well, but this is sort of the one-stop shop where you can see who those groups are connected to which tasks they are. So, yeah.
Alright, I don't need a microphone, I'm very loud. So I think the main thing, we're gonna kind of step back a little, the purpose of this project is it's community centered. So all of the projects are steered by the community. These are community groups. These are groups that can make these action items happen. So with these groups can make these things become a reality. It's not just one entity that's going to make one thing happen. Because of the simple fact we need all these different parties. We need everyone in these different organizations to come together and make these things possible. That's how you get tangible results. These are action items that are driven by these groups and these individuals. So when you look at, strength and location in communities, as you know, we have church groups, we have schools, we have the work-based, the workforce entities. These are entities that can drive home these projects. So we need to understand that this project is community-centered, and as a group, as a community, these things happen.
Thanks, Sylvia. I see another hand. Yes?
Those of us that were not included in the previous process, if you wanted to be involved in this, I'm with One Center Community Action, we've been around for 57 years, and we were not even invited to the previous process. We've got a community center on the website and the east side, and I just want to make sure that our agency is involved.
Great, thank you. So for anyone who didn't hear, the question was, we have a group that wasn't on the advisory coalition, but we want to be involved. How do we do that? And I would say, anybody in that situation, I don't know who all that is, but shoot me an email, get connected to Clarence, and let's talk about how to connect. Yes?
So from what I'm hearing, or seeing something tangible in the timeline, until these groups get together, figure something out, I'm not gonna see any results.
I didn't quite hear, so I think the question was, and the next step, these groups get together, and until that happens, you're not gonna see results. And I'd say, yes, that's right, the next step is that for the task items, the groups are gonna settle and start and talk through who the leadership person is, and then work on a work plan for addressing that task and move forward.
And when are these groups gonna start, conjuring with each other to start implementing the tasks?
So I don't know the date for those yet. We would encourage it to be soon, but I don't have a specific date for each one. Each one will be different, and it'll depend on that group's schedule.
Clarence just answered that though. He said that over the next several weeks, EDC is gonna be handling this and he'll be bringing people together and identifying that.
Sorry about that. So Andy just reminded me, Clarence just said that they're gonna be getting with each of these groups over the next 3 weeks, and in fact, identifying what those next steps are for the end of the year.
Right. Michigan Boulevard Group has been meeting for the last 3 months. Strengthening Michigan Boulevard has been meeting at the police department for the last 3 months. So that group has already started.
I represent the 3rd Ward, so I'm gonna focus on, I love the city together. I just wanna make sure, we're moving the wheel on the 3rd Ward.
Great, thank you.
That's right.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ken.
It's okay, yeah. So, I don't know if I need a. But I do want to say that, because I kind of sat on the group and then even before we're assigning the tasks, we already started the mural here and finished one at home. So, but, and I hope you'll all go see it. Walk to your left when you go up. But my point is, I think it would be really helpful for people to let us know how to communicate with everyone, because we put lawn signs, we put it in the newspaper, we put notices in people's mailboxes, we put it on Facebook, and yet people in the neighborhood will drive by and be like, hey, what are you doing? Like, so I think there is I'm just addressing that. For us, we want to know how to get a hold of as many stakeholders as we can. And, we would have loved more people at all the input sessions that we held for the mural. So I just think it's helpful to know how people get their information.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So one of the things we heard at another city that in Seymour is we got some ideas from folks that, hey, the groups you're trying to talk to, I know they're on Facebook Live or whatever. Things like that where we think, hey, you're missing your people that I think you could connect with because they're all linked up by this group or that. So let us know if it's really helpful for everybody. Yes?
One more. I know there's a lot of people here, but can we get a couple sign-in sheets for people with their name and email address? I'm addressing the question that Janet brought up here about being able to contact everyone. You can start email lists, people that want to give their email, so it'd be simple, put them in an email group and it just goes out. I don't know if we have any pads of paper that can be pushed around right now. People can sign their name, their email address.
I would say versus the email address, or put on there your phone number, email, best way to contact you, because they also have, mass text, because everybody check email, so you can receive that communication by text with them.
There was a registration process that depends on that captures on my phone here.
Oh, we have a great answer here. The website, vibrantmc.com, you can sign up on there, so I encourage everybody who can get on that website and sign in there. Yes?
I want to go back to that gentleman's question, when is this going to be implemented, and who is going to
Thank you. So, I'm sorry, ma'am.
and where's the money coming from?
So, another question about who is going to implement this and where does the money come from? So, from from the consultant side, you know, we're gonna fade away, and the people that are really gonna work on these tasks are labeled as the implementers. So those are the groups that will be tasked with implementing the individual things in the book. For timeline, the targets that are set are anywhere from 1 year for short term, up to 3 years for midterm, and then for long term, those things that we think will take past those 3 years. And then for funding sources, none of those are a guarantee, but under each task stage, we have listed the potential funding sources and ones that we're suggesting we pursue for those things. Yes.
You like to go to see more of the office of
Yes.
very in particular about the project here, or strengths, lots of things are here, what's up, or those kind of things.
Yes, I think, well, Michigan City's definitely unique. Oh, I'm sorry, for those who didn't hear the question, it was, just reiterating, you know, we worked in Michigan City, Seymour, and Warsaw. What about Michigan City did you notice that maybe is unique from those other towns regarding strengths or opportunities? Each city is different. It's a much more diverse population here. The barriers are higher in some of the target areas, so higher unemployment, also higher vacancy in some of the neighborhoods, but there's also opportunities that the other cities don't have. So some of the large-scale sites that have been barriers in the past are either slated to be closed or could be closed over the next decade, maybe less, and that's the prison site and NIPSCO. And are there opportunities to turn some of the negatives in the past into positives for the west side in particular, and for this neighborhood that is so closed off from Lake Michigan and the National Park to be connected into it in a way that neighborhoods really are. So some of the challenges and opportunities are also some of the similarities. Yes?
One of the challenges that we might have to face is cleaning up some of the sites that we want to do. And clean up stuff. It's built on gold-edge and sand. Is that part of the plan at all?
Yes, absolutely. For any of the sites with environmental challenges, one of the major tasks is the environmental cleanup. Now, that particular issue, I know from past experience, that's going to be longer than a 3-year process. And for those, that's where we've talked about those being long-term goals. So what steps can we take now to ensure that they move in a momentum and direction for the benefit of the community? Yes, the environmental cleanup is going to be a long-term process. Yes.
I had a chance to read the document. First of all, I applaud the effort because it's obviously the overarching principle is to be inclusive and to try to get everybody engaged. I think tonight's a good example of that. And we know you don't have all the answers, but another overriding principle I would hope would be incorporated would be the quality of the construction and the quality of the work that goes into it. Because so often we try to do stuff on the cheap rather than really create something that's beautiful and sustainable. And I was hoping Janet was going to, when she waved her hand, that she was always going to argue perhaps some more art elements in any portion across the plan. Because we want to build more pride. We have a beautiful city already, but it would be even better if we have some of those principles incorporated in there. And maybe they are. I agree to that.
Yeah, thank you for that. So the comment was, can we make sure that the things we're talking about building as part of the plan are built sustainably for the long term and incorporate beauty and elements of art, things of that nature, and definitely it's a long plan, but if you go through the tasks, there's not every single one, but a lot of them do speak to beauty and art and incorporating creativity.
I think in some of the tasks, like specifically with NIPSCO, I think we have to think about it differently because right now you have the box starting the head house by putting them in line with being an implementer. And I mean, NIPSCO doesn't want to clean up this garage. So you have fire protection and other folks that are really engaged in the task, making sure that they're doing things. So I would envision something more like the advisory board, including best practitioners that drive employees and their roles, all the folks involved, and like CPE, versus again having a meeting at the function and how that sort of feels. And thank you really for this because there is a lot more there. It's layers of complexity that it is so creative than the actual transition concept. Especially if we're looking at as early as 2026, as late as 2028, that's what they're saying right now. So let's really like dive into the layers of complexity that I can do where the community fits with that. And I would love to just even say, could there be an option to sign up for these caps, including like other organizations were saying that they weren't able to participate, including my other organization. We want to adopt at least participate in 6. Is there an option to be able to participate and sign up today within that too, to make sure that we can get that follow-up? But just 2 points there.
Yeah, so I'll say that aloud for individual here. There's kind of addressing that, we're showing NIPSCO as in the leadership role on the future of the property, but there's concern because, as an organization, they may not be wanting to do some of the things that we're suggesting need to be done for community benefit. Absolutely true. I think when we list that, there's just an acknowledgement that they are the owner of the property, and so working with them is trying to happen over time. The second part of the question was, for those in the room that weren't on the advisory coalition, but they want to be involved in the tasks listed here, can we be involved, can we participate, how do we let you know that? And I would say the first step would be the website, mypermissioncity.com, but I'd also encourage you to, after the meeting, maybe get a hold of Clarence or somebody else on the board team and just say, hey, I'm in an organization, I'm personally really passionate about this, I want to be involved, and I think I can help you forward. Yeah, just listen.
There's 3 long-term goals here that are all beyond the control of anybody in Michigan City. And they are the NIPSCO plant closure and reuse, the potential closure of the prison that may or may not happen, and also Highway 12 becoming a safer street as it goes through the west side and a better access point eventually to the water. And those are all things controlled by the state or by NIPSCO. And so the question is, what do you do about that as a community? And ultimately, it goes, and it's going to take longer than 3 years probably for any of those things to be resolved. So it's really about advocacy and being organized as a community and knowing what you want, and then just sticking with it over time and having different voices working together to keep pushing that. And so ultimately, the work of that is about organizing and having clear goals of what you want the end to look like, and continuing to push and being organized to keep your voice as many places it needs to be to influence what happens in all 3 of those spaces. So I would say that's a distinctive from the other cities, that they didn't really have these big things that were outside, controlled by entities outside of the city, and it's a particular piece of work that's hard to do, and it's not like you just go raise the money and then do it in a year. It's a long-term task, but if you're not organized, your voice is, and exactly what you have to do 2 years from now to influence that, you don't even know right now. So it's a process for making those decisions that will roll out over the next few years. So being ready, and one of the reasons why these renderings and the ideas for these sites were actually created, with a lot of creativity went into that, and expense in that, was to have some kind of vision that everybody can look at and say, well, it's not going to look exactly like this, but it's something like this where we want to end up. And then you can just keep working toward that.
I think so. Hey. Yes.
Referencing those renderings, they're a great visual aid for those of us who haven't heard much about this yet. Do you have similar suggestions for each of these subtopics for these community groups to base their plans off of, like suggestions like this and visual aids?
No, we only have a few visual aids in the plan, but sometimes within the task itself, and that's just due to timing and availability of scope, time to get there. But for some of them, we have identified as one of those year 1. So in the top right, not this page, but on the individual task page in the upper right hand corner, you'll see things like year 1, and then it might have 1, 2, 3 projects to do. On a lot of those, it is identified that this project is in need of a feasibility study or maybe that's design options to review with community or things like that. But for the plan, what you see is what you get on those. That's a rendering of the prison site and a rendering of the NIPSCO site, map of the trail system, and some visual vehicles for the innovation center and the creative.
Josh, what suggests me having to
Yeah, okay, so I saw one more hand up, then we're gonna stop and I'm gonna switch to something else. Yes.
This is a fantastic.
That was funded by the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. This is in the process. Any of the tasks within there will be targeted, or folks will be targeting individual funding sources to move those forward. And now at this time, I think Clarence, you wanted to just acknowledge and thank some folks from the core team and from the advisory coalition.
Thank you again for your time for coming out. I'd like to acknowledge the people who spent time here the last 6 months meeting. So with both the core team and the advisory group stand up so we know who you are. I think that this is some people, but this is part of the core team. We were asked to put together a group of 25 people, so which means everybody can't be invited. So we try to invite people who were active in the same space, and we were asked to put together residents, business, elected official, and nonprofits. So we started doing that. It gets really small. People can come to the meeting instead. One idea was to put us out on the internet, and as I recommended, we'll definitely have the group there listed, and we want to make sure that you're now on that list. You want to be part of any list. Please call me. We'll make sure you talk to people on that list, and we can start moving forward because a lot can be done. So more hands make it a lot easier. So again, Josh, I'm done. So thank you for your time.
I see that, I know the mayor is here. Are there other elected officials that are here as well?
You, man.
All of you stand. So thank you for participating, and we'll definitely need your help on this. The one thing I just want to say is that, there's a lot of questions about funding and how this actually happens. And we have, as I said, there are 11 other cities that are using this approach. And it's different than the sort of old mindset of creating a big plan and having one big agency that puts together a lot of funding. A lot of times in those cases it's public funding for whatever is in renewal. This is a very different approach. This is about the power of a lot of small things that are all pointed in the same direction, accomplishing something really big. And the good thing about that is that it gives a lot. There's no one person in control. There's no centralized power. There's no one big budget that has to be approved, and if it fails, then the whole thing falls apart. And also it is much more adaptable over time. That next year something's going to be different. Next year there may be a federal level some new program you can take advantage of, or maybe something gets cut that used to be funding that we think is going to fund this. So how do you adapt? And when you have many different organizations who've all said, we'll put our name next to this, work on our piece, and we'll also try to coordinate with the people working on the other pieces. It's much more resilient, it's much more adaptable, and no one organization controls it, but it's powerful when you add it all up. And so this is a different approach than sort of the old mindset of urban renewal. It's very much about grassroots community working together. We go in the same direction through a lot of different pathways. And so all of you could have a role in every part of this, and we've seen this over and over again in neighborhoods and cities around the country. This approach has been used, and when the hard work of coordination happens, and you have clear goals, and you keep those in mind, and keep engaging the community again over and over again, it really works. So I'm excited to see what Michigan City will do with that. And so I know it doesn't answer all the questions about budgets and exactly when, because there's 100 different answers to that question, because there's 100 different places it's going to happen from. So Which is a lot more complicated, but really exciting and exciting when it works.
Okay, I think that's it for our group. I would encourage you, so, I thought we'd be a little bit briefer, but I'm glad that we weren't, because there was a lot of great questions. But now, look around this room, there are a lot of people involved in a lot of great activities. Some of you, I don't even know who you are, but I'm kind of hearing from you that, hey, I'm doing a lot, and that's awesome. I would encourage you now to go shake each other's hands, network. Like, it's hard to get this many people doing this many things in the city together very often, so go get some sandwiches, get some food, get some drinks, hang out and talk to each other and see how we can help each other, or see how we left you out and we can help you out in some of these tasks that maybe you can do it more than we talked about. And let us know, and we'll move forward. Yes, please. So, and we can do that with real quick. The question was not in pronunciation. Let's